Have you ever heard of a horse labeled cursed and left for slaughter? Meet Blaze, and the brave 10-year-old girl who risked everything to save him. This is a story of courage, trust, and redemption that will touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Let's dive in. The dusty Texas summer stretched on, the sun glaring down mercilessly as the occasional gust of wind stirred up the red dirt in the small auction yard. Emily Carter, a wiry 10-year-old with freckled cheeks and big, curious brown eyes, stood by her father's side, her small hand gripping the edge of his weathered denim jacket. The air smelled of hay, sweat, and something acrid. Fear, perhaps. It was her first visit to the annual livestock auction in their town, a chaotic event where cattle, pigs, and horses were bought and sold, their lives traded with the wave of a hand. "Stay close, Em," her father, Sam Carter, muttered, his voice low but firm. His tall, broad-shouldered frame towered over Emily, his cowboy hat casting a shadow across his sun-worn face. Sam had brought her along reluctantly. "This isn't a place for kids," he'd said that morning, but Emily's persistent pleading had worn him down. Emily's attention wandered as she followed Sam through the crowd, her eyes darting between the pens of restless animals and the rough-spoken ranchers shouting bids. Then she saw him. In a small pen near the edge of the auction yard, isolated from the other animals, stood a horse unlike any she'd ever seen. His jet-black coat gleamed even under layers of dust, but his eyes, wild and filled with unbridled rage, pierced through her. A scar ran down his right flank, jagged and raw, like a mark of war. "What's wrong with that one?" she asked, tugging on her father's sleeve. Sam stopped and turned, following her gaze. His expression darkened when he saw the horse. "That's Blaze," he said, almost spitting the name. "They say he's cursed. Dangerous. Not fit for anything but slaughter." Emily's heart clenched. She couldn't explain it, but something about the horse pulled at her. She stepped closer to the pen despite her father's warning glance. Blaze snorted, pawing at the ground, his ears flattened against his head. A small crowd had gathered, whispering in hushed tones about the wild beast no one dared approach. "Why's he like that?" Emily asked an older man leaning against the pen. The man, dressed in faded overalls and a battered hat, shook his head. "Abused, I reckon," he replied. "He's been passed from owner to owner. None of 'em good. Last one tried to race him, whipped him half to death when he lost. Ain't nobody been able to break him since." Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight. "He's not bad," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Kid, that horse has got a devil in him. Best let him go." But Emily didn't see the devil. She saw pain, mistrust, and fear, all wrapped in the sleek, powerful body of a creature that had been pushed too far. Before she knew it, she was speaking up. "How much for him?" Sam's head whipped around, his voice sharp. "Emily, no." The auctioneer, a burly man with a booming voice, laughed from his platform. "This one's not for kids, sweetheart. He's headed for the slaughterhouse unless one of y'all's crazy enough to take him." "I'll take him," Emily declared, her small voice cutting through the murmurs. The crowd turned to stare, a mix of amusement and disbelief on their faces. Sam knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "Emily, this isn't a game. That horse could kill you. He's not a pet." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't back down. "He's not dangerous, Dad. He's just scared. Please, let me help him." A new voice cut through the tension. She might be right. Jack Wilson, an old rancher with a kind face and a limp, stepped forward. "Sometimes it takes a softer hand to tame a wild heart." Sam sighed, defeated. "This is on you, Emily," he said at last. "You better pray you know what you're doing." As the auctioneer finalized the sale, Emily looked at Blaze and whispered, "I'll take care of you. I promise." Blaze stared back, his wild eyes unreadable. But for the first time, he didn't back away. The rumble of the trailer echoed through the dirt road as Emily rode in the truck's passenger seat beside Jack Wilson. Her father had refused to transport Blaze himself, leaving the task to the seasoned rancher who had agreed to help. Jack's old pickup truck smelled faintly of tobacco and leather, and his hands gripped the steering wheel with a steady calm, though his weathered face bore a hint of doubt. "You know," Jack began, his voice gravelly but warm, "a horse like Blaze ain't gonna be easy. He's seen a lot of bad in this world, and that kind of hurt doesn't just go away." Emily, her small hands clutching her knees, glanced out the window at the trailer hitched behind them. She couldn't see Blaze, but she could feel his presence, restless and defiant even through the metal walls. "I know," she replied softly, her voice carrying more determination than her age should have allowed. "But I have to try." Jack smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You've got a fire in you, kid. Just make sure you don't get burned." When they arrived at Jack's ranch, the evening sun cast a golden glow over the sprawling fields and weathered wooden fences. The place was quiet, save for the occasional neigh from one of the ranch's other horses. Emily hopped out of the truck, her heart pounding as she approached the trailer. Jack opened the latch cautiously, speaking in a low, soothing tone. "Easy now, boy," he murmured as he eased the trailer door open. Blaze stood inside, his muscles taut and his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. He stomped his hoof against the floor, the sound reverberating in the still air. Emily took a step forward, her small frame dwarfed by the towering horse. "It's okay, Blaze," she said gently, her voice trembling but steady. "You're safe now." Blaze snorted, tossing his head as if to challenge her claim. Jack placed a firm hand on Emily's shoulder. "Careful now. He doesn't know you yet. I just want to let him know I'm here," Emily replied, her eyes never leaving the horse. She took another step, holding out a small piece of apple she had hidden in her pocket. Blaze's ears twitched, his nostrils flaring as he caught the scent. He hesitated, his sharp eyes studying her every move. "Come on, Blaze," she whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." For a moment, it seemed as if he might approach, but then he reared back, his hooves striking the air as he let out a powerful whinny. Emily stumbled backward, and Jack stepped in, his voice firm but calm. "Whoa there, boy. No one's gonna hurt you." He closed the trailer door halfway to give Blaze a sense of security while still allowing him to see the open space of the paddock. "Let's give him some time." Over the next hour, Blaze was coaxed out of the trailer and into a small paddock near the barn. He paced nervously, his movements sharp and unpredictable. Emily sat just outside the fence, her legs crossed and her eyes fixed on him. "Why don't you head home for tonight?" Jack suggested as the sun dipped below the horizon. "You've done enough for one day." Emily shook her head. "He needs to know I'm not giving up on him." Jack sighed but didn't argue. He brought out a chair for himself and sat nearby, his watchful gaze alternating between the girl and the horse. As the night deepened, Blaze finally stopped pacing. He stood in the middle of the paddock, his ears swiveling toward Emily. She reached into her pocket and tossed another slice of apple into the pin. Blaze sniffed the air but didn't move toward it. "That's progress," Jack murmured. "Small steps, Emily." She nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and determination. "I'll be here as long as it takes." Blaze didn't approach her that night, but for the first time, he stood still, watching her with an expression that was less fear and more curiosity. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. The morning sun rose over the ranch, casting a warm light over the paddocks and the rolling Texas hills. Emily had barely slept, but she was already seated outside Blaze's pen, her notebook resting on her lap. She'd begun documenting everything. Blaze's reactions, his movements, even the way his ears twitched when she spoke to him. To her, every tiny detail was a clue to understanding him. Jack walked out of the barn, his boots crunching on the dirt. He carried a bucket of oats and a small bale of hay. "Mornin', Emily. You're up early." "I wanted to see him wake up," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. Jack chuckled and shook his head. "You've got more patience than most grown folks I know. But patience alone won't fix a horse like him. He's got a storm in him." Blaze stood at the far end of the paddock, his jet-black coat gleaming in the sunlight. He pawed the ground nervously, his eyes darting to Emily and Jack as they talked. His ears flicked forward and back, every sound putting him on edge. "He didn't eat much last night," Emily said, her brow furrowed with worry. Give him time, Jack replied. He's in a strange place. Doesn't know what to expect yet. Jack set the bucket of oats just inside the fence and walked away slowly, leaving Blaze to approach on his own terms. The horse snorted and stepped cautiously toward the bucket, his movements jerky and uncertain. As he finally lowered his head to sniff the food, Emily held her breath. But the peace didn't last long. The sound of a passing truck on the nearby road startled Blaze. His head shot up, and he bolted to the far corner of the paddock, his powerful legs kicking up dirt as he went. Emily winced, feeling the horse's fear as if it were her own. Easy, boy, she murmured, though she knew he couldn't hear her from that distance. Jack sighed. This is how it's gonna be for a while. He's been through hell, Emily. Trust doesn't come easy for animals like him, or people, for that matter. Emily turned to Jack, her expression earnest. But he'll learn, right? If I keep trying. Jack hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. Maybe, but you've got to be ready for the possibility that he won't. Some scars run too deep. Emily clenched her fists in her lap, her resolve hardening. I can't give up on him, Jack. No one else ever gave him a chance. Over the next few days, Emily devoted every spare moment to Blaze. She read books on horse behavior borrowed from the library, spending hours watching Blaze and trying to decode his reactions. She sat near the paddock every morning, talking to him in a soothing voice. I know you don't trust me yet, she said one afternoon, her voice gentle. But I'm not going anywhere. Blaze would pace, his powerful muscles rippling under his glossy coat, but he never came close. Each time Emily offered a treat, he ignored it, his sharp eyes filled with suspicion. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Emily tried something different. Instead of speaking to Blaze, she brought a book and sat with her back to him, reading aloud. Her soft voice filled the quiet air, weaving a story of adventure and courage. Jack watched from the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand. You're doing something right, he said quietly to himself, noticing how Blaze had stopped pacing and stood still, his ears swiveling toward Emily's voice. By the end of the week, a small breakthrough came. As Emily sat with her back to the paddock, reading her book, she felt a warm breath on her neck. She froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she turned her head to find Blaze standing just a foot away, his dark eyes filled with cautious curiosity. Hi there, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Blaze didn't bolt. He simply stood there, his powerful frame tense but unmoving. For the first time, Emily saw something in his eyes that wasn't fear. It was the faintest flicker of trust. Jack walked over, his boots quiet on the dirt. That's something, he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You're breaking through, Emily. Emily reached out slowly, but Blaze stepped back, keeping his distance. Still, he didn't retreat to the far end of the paddock. He stood his ground, watching her intently. It's not much, Emily said, her voice trembling with emotion. But it's a start. Jack nodded. Sometimes, a start is all you need. The Texas mornings were cooler now, the early autumn air carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. Emily sat cross-legged just outside Blaze's paddock, her fingers carefully peeling an apple into slices. The crisp sound of the fruit breaking apart seemed to echo in the stillness. Blaze watched her from a distance, his sharp eyes following her every move. Today's the day, Blaze, Emily murmured, her voice low and steady. I know you're ready. The week had been one of subtle victories. Blaze no longer bolted when she approached the fence. He would stand a little closer, his muscles tense but not rigid with fear. Emily had learned to read his body language like a book. The way his ears flicked forward when he was curious, the way his nostrils flared when something unsettled him. Each small sign of progress fueled her determination. Jack leaned against the fence nearby, his weathered cowboy hat tilted back as he watched the interaction. You've got more patience than most ranch hands I know, he said with a chuckle. But don't rush it, Emily. Trust takes time. I know, Emily replied without looking away from Blaze. But I can feel it. He's starting to believe in me. She held out a slice of apple in her palm, her hand steady despite the fluttering in her chest. Blaze took a hesitant step forward, his hooves crunching softly on the dirt. Emily remained still, her heart pounding in her ears. The horse's nostrils flared as he caught the scent of the apple, and for a moment, he froze. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's just me." Blaze stretched his neck forward, his movements cautious and deliberate. The tension in the air was palpable as he sniffed the apple in her hand. Then, with a swift motion, he snatched the slice from her palm and stepped back, chewing noisily. Emily's face broke into a wide smile. "You did it," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "You trusted me." Jack straightened, clapping his hands together once. "That's a big step, Emily. Don't underestimate what that means." Encouraged, Emily offered another slice. This time, Blaze didn't hesitate as long. He took the apple from her hand again, his dark eyes locking with hers for a brief moment before retreating. By the end of the week, Blaze was coming to Emily willingly for treats. She began to carry a soft brush with her, hoping he'd allow her to touch him. One afternoon, as Blaze stood near the fence, Emily held the brush out for him to see. "This won't hurt," she said gently, her voice like a soft melody. "It'll make you feel better, I promise." Blaze eyed the brush warily but didn't back away. Slowly, Emily reached out, her movements deliberate and calm. The first touch of the bristles on his sleek coat made him flinch, but he didn't bolt. Emily stroked his neck in slow, even motions, murmuring soothing words. "That's it, Blaze," she said, her tone full of encouragement. "You're doing so good." As she brushed him, Emily noticed something she hadn't seen before. Long, deep scars hidden beneath his black coat. They crisscrossed his body, evidence of the abuse he'd endured. Her chest tightened with anger and sadness. She paused, her hand trembling. Jack approached from behind, his expression somber as he saw the marks. "Those are from a hard life," he said quietly. "Poor guy's been through hell." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "He didn't deserve this," she said fiercely. "No animal does." Jack nodded, his gaze softening. "That's true. And he's lucky to have you now." From that day forward, the bond between Emily and Blaze grew stronger. She spent hours grooming him, talking to him, and simply sitting by his side. Blaze began to follow her movements, his trust in her deepening with each passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the ranch, Blaze nudged Emily's shoulder with his nose for the first time. She laughed, the sound light and full of joy. "Guess that means we're friends now," she said, scratching his neck. Blaze let out a soft snort, his eyes calm for the first time since she'd met him. Jack watched from the porch, a smile tugging at his lips. "You've got away with him, Emily. Don't know how you do it." "It's not magic," she replied, her voice full of quiet determination. "It's just love." Blaze stood beside her, no longer the wild, terrified creature he'd been when she first saw him. He wasn't fully healed yet, far from it. But Emily knew they were on the right path. Together, they were proving that even the most broken souls could find their way back to trust. The morning air was crisp as Emily walked to Blaze's paddock, her arms full of supplies. A fresh set of brushes, a soft cloth, and a small bucket of warm, soapy water. Today, she was determined to give him a proper cleaning. Blaze stood near the fence, his sleek, black coat catching the golden light of the rising sun. He greeted her with a soft snort, a far cry from the wary creature she had first met. "Good morning, boy," Emily said, her voice warm. She set the bucket down and held up a brush. "Ready for some pampering?" Blaze stepped closer, his eyes curious but calm. Emily opened the gate slowly, her movements deliberate. It had taken weeks to reach this point, to be inside the paddock with Blaze without fear of him bolting or lashing out. She let the gate swing shut behind her, careful not to make any sudden noises. Jack leaned against the fence nearby, sipping his coffee. "You're brave, kid," he called out. "Just take it slow. He's trusting you now, but don't push him too far." "I know," Emily replied, glancing over her shoulder. "We'll take it one step at a time." She began brushing Blaze's neck, working in slow, gentle strokes. The rhythmic motion seemed to soothe him, and for a while, he stood still, his ears flicking lazily. Emily smiled as she moved down his side, marveling at how far they'd come. But then, as she brushed closer to his flank, Blaze stiffened. Emily froze, her hand hovering in midair. "It's okay, Blaze," she said softly, stepping back to give him space. "I'm not going to hurt you." Blaze let out a sharp breath, his muscles quivering, but he didn't move away. Encouraged, Emily took a step forward and continued brushing, her movements slow and deliberate. That's when she saw them. Scars. Long, jagged lines etched into his skin, hidden beneath the glossy black of his coat. Some were faded and old, while others were still raw, as if they had never healed properly. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Oh, Blaze," she whispered, her voice breaking. She set the brush aside and crouched beside him, running her fingers lightly over the scars. Each one told a story of pain and survival, of the cruelty Blaze had endured. Tears welled in her eyes. Jack, noticing her silence, set down his coffee and walked into the paddock. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Emily didn't answer at first. She simply pointed to Blaze's scars. Jack's face darkened as he took in the sight. "Damn," he muttered, shaking his head. "Poor fella's been through the ringer." Emily stood, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Who would do this?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger. "How could anyone hurt him like this?" Jack sighed, his expression heavy. "There's no shortage of cruel people in this world, Emily. Some folks see animals as nothing more than tools, something to use and toss aside when they're no longer useful." Emily clenched her fists. "It's not right. He didn't deserve this." "No, he didn't," Jack agreed. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle. "But he's got you now, and you're giving him a chance to heal." That evening, Emily called Laura Bennett, a local animal rights advocate who had helped rescue abused horses before. Laura was a tall, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for taking on the toughest cases. She arrived the next morning, her truck kicking up a cloud of dust as it pulled into the ranch. "So this is Blaze," Laura said, her sharp eyes scanning the horse. She crouched down to examine his scars, her face a mask of professionalism. "He's been through hell, that's for sure. Do you know where he came from?" Emily asked, her voice filled with urgency. Laura nodded. "I've seen these kinds of scars before. My guess? He was part of an illegal racing ring. They push these horses to their limits, whip them if they don't perform, and toss them aside when they're no longer useful." Emily's stomach churned. "How do we stop them?" Laura looked at her, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. "It's not easy. These people are dangerous, and they don't like being exposed. But if Blaze can help us prove what they're doing, we might have a chance." Emily glanced at Blaze, who stood quietly beside her, his dark eyes filled with a mix of fear and trust. "I'll do whatever it takes to help him," she said firmly. Laura smiled faintly. "You've got guts, kid, and you're going to need them. This fight isn't over." As Laura left to begin her investigation, Emily returned to Blaze's paddock, her heart heavy with the weight of what she'd learned. She stroked his neck, her voice barely a whisper. "We're going to stop them, Blaze. I promise." Blaze nudged her gently, as if to say he believed her. The early morning sun filtered through the tall oak trees lining the ranch, casting long shadows over the paddock where Blaze stood. Emily watched him from the porch, her mind racing with what Laura had told her. The idea that Blaze had been part of an illegal racing ring haunted her, the scars on his body now a constant reminder of the cruelty he'd endured. Laura arrived later that morning with a manila folder tucked under her arm and a determined look on her face. "Emily, Jack," she greeted as she stepped out of her truck, her boots crunching against the gravel driveway. "We've got a lead." Emily hurried to meet her, her heart pounding. "What did you find?" Laura handed the folder to Jack, who opened it and scanned the contents. "Blaze was sold at an auction house in New Mexico 6 months ago," Laura explained. "That auction is notorious for shady dealings. Horses like Blaze are usually funneled through it to cover up their origins." Jack frowned as he flipped through the papers. "And who owned him before that?" "An operation run out of a ranch just over the border," Laura said, her voice tight. "They specialize in unregulated races, Cash bets, no oversight. It's brutal. Horses are whipped to exhaustion, drugged to improve performance, and abandoned if they're injured. Emily's hands curled into fists at her sides. How can they get away with this? Laura sighed. It's not easy to catch them. They keep everything under the radar. But Blaze might be our ticket to exposing them. Jack raised an eyebrow. How so? His scars, for one, Laura replied. They're consistent with the kind of injuries we've seen from this ring. And his auction records could lead us to more evidence. But we need more than that to shut them down. Emily looked at Blaze, who was grazing quietly in the paddock. What else do we need? Laura hesitated, then looked Emily straight in the eye. We need someone to lure them out. Jack stiffened. Hold on, now. You're not suggesting putting this kid in harm's way? No, of course not, Laura said quickly. But Blaze could be bait. If the people who ran him he's alive, and at this ranch, they'll come looking for him. They don't want any loose ends. Emily's stomach turned at the thought. What if they try to hurt him again? They won't get the chance, Laura assured her. I'll coordinate with local law enforcement. We'll set a trap and catch them in the act. But it's risky, and you need to be prepared. Jack crossed his arms, his face etched with concern. This isn't a decision to take lightly. Emily swallowed hard, her gaze shifting to Blaze. He looked back at her, his dark eyes calm yet full of something she couldn't quite name. Trust, perhaps. I want to do it, she said finally. If it means stopping them from hurting other horses, I'll do whatever it takes. Jack shook his head. Emily, she's right, Laura interjected. This is our best shot, but it has to be done carefully. We'll make sure she's safe, Jack. I promise. The following days were a flurry of preparations. Laura worked with the sheriff's department to set up surveillance around the ranch. Officers dressed in plain clothes came and went, placing hidden cameras and setting up a secure perimeter. Jack reinforced the paddock fence and installed extra lighting around the property. Emily spent her days with Blaze, trying to keep her nerves at bay. She brushed his coat, spoke to him softly, and gave him plenty of treats, all while rehearsing the plan in her head. She couldn't let her fear show, not now. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack joined her by the paddock. You know this isn't gonna be easy, right? He said, his voice low. I know, Emily replied, stroking Blaze's neck. But I'm not afraid. Jack sighed. You're braver than most grown men I know. Just promise me you'll stick to the plan and let us handle the rest. I promise. That night, Emily lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She could hear Blaze's soft whinnies outside, a comforting sound in the stillness. We're going to stop them, Blaze, she whispered to the darkness. And when this is over, you'll never have to be afraid again. The quiet serenity of the ranch was broken late one night by the sound of tires crunching gravel. Emily, sitting by the window in her room, froze as headlights sliced through the darkness and illuminated the paddock where Blaze rested. Her heart leapt into her throat. Someone was here, and she knew it wasn't a friendly visit. Dad. Jack, she called out, rushing down the stairs. Jack was already at the front door, his rifle in hand. Sam Carter, Emily's father, had come over earlier that evening to check on things and now stood beside Jack, tension etched into his face. Stay inside, Jack ordered Emily firmly. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a sharp focus that unnerved her. I'm not leaving, Blaze, Emily protested, grabbing her jacket. You will do as I say, Jack said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emily hesitated but stepped back reluctantly, her fists clenched. From the window, she watched as Jack and Sam walked out onto the porch. A black truck idled just beyond the gate, its engine rumbling ominously. Two men stepped out, their silhouettes dark against the headlights. Evening, one of the men drawled, his voice carrying across the yard. He was tall and wiry, with a face that seemed permanently set in a sneer. His companion was shorter but stocky, his shoulders broad under a faded leather jacket. What do you want? Jack called back, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. We're here for the horse, the wiry man replied, pointing toward the paddock where Blaze stood, his ears twitching nervously. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle. This horse isn't for sale. The stocky man took a step closer, his hands in his jacket pockets. "We're not looking to buy, old man. That horse belongs to us." "Not anymore," Jack said firmly. "You sold him at auction. He's mine now." The wiry man chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "See, that's the thing. We didn't realize he'd end up here. And now we need him back." Sam stepped forward, his voice hard. "You're not getting him. Leave, or I'll call the sheriff." The stocky man's expression darkened. "You think the sheriff scares us? We've dealt with worse than him." Inside the house, Emily's stomach churned with fear. She could see Blaze pacing in the paddock, his movements jittery and agitated. She couldn't stand by any longer. She grabbed her phone and texted Laura. "They're here. 2 men, black truck." Laura's response came almost immediately. "Stay inside. Cops are on their way." But the situation outside was escalating. The wiry man stepped closer to the porch, his hand resting on something tucked into his waistband. "We're giving you one last chance," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Hand over the horse, or we'll take him ourselves." "You're not taking anything," Jack said, raising the rifle slightly. "Now get off my property." For a moment, it seemed like the men might push further, but then the distant wail of sirens pierced the night. The wiry man cursed under his breath, and the stocky man pulled him back toward the truck. "This isn't over." The wiry man spat as they climbed into the vehicle. The truck roared to life and sped off, its taillights disappearing into the darkness. Jack lowered the rifle and turned to Sam. "We need to tighten security around here." Sam nodded grimly. "And we need to move fast. They'll be back." Emily burst onto the porch, tears streaming down her face. "They were going to hurt Blaze." "They can't take him, Jack." "They can't." Jack knelt beside her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "They won't, Emily. Not as long as I'm here." Minutes later, Laura arrived with 2 sheriff's deputies in tow. They surveyed the scene, taking notes and inspecting the paddock for any signs of tampering. Blaze stood in the corner, his powerful frame trembling. "He's terrified," Emily said, her voice cracking. "I can't let them take him." Laura placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll protect him, Emily, but we need to act fast. If they're bold enough to show up like this, they're not going to stop." The deputies agreed to station patrols near the ranch, but Laura insisted that wasn't enough. "We need to set the trap soon," she said. "The longer we wait, the more desperate they'll get." That night, as Emily sat by Blaze's paddock, she couldn't shake the fear that gripped her. Blaze nuzzled her shoulder gently, as if sensing her unease. "We'll keep you safe," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I won't let them hurt you again." Blaze snorted softly, his warm breath brushing against her cheek. In that moment, Emily realized just how much he trusted her, and how much she owed it to him to see this through. The morning after the confrontation, the ranch was alive with activity. Laura and the sheriff's deputies arrived early to discuss their plan with Jack, Sam, and Emily. Blaze, still shaken from the previous night, paced in his paddock, his ears flicking nervously at every sound. Emily stood near the fence, stroking his neck in an attempt to calm him. Laura approached, her expression serious. "Emily, can we talk?" Emily turned, her hands resting on the fence. "Are we going to stop them?" she asked, her voice laced with determination. Laura nodded. "That's the plan. But I need you to understand how dangerous this is. These people are criminals. They've hurt animals and people for profit. If we're going to expose them, we need to be careful." Jack joined them, crossing his arms over his chest. "What exactly is your plan, Laura?" Laura glanced at the group, her eyes landing on Emily. "We're going to use Blaze to lure them out. Word will get back to their operation that Blaze is here. When they come to take him, we'll have the sheriff's team ready to move in." Emily's stomach twisted. The thought of Blaze being used as bait made her uneasy. "What if they hurt him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They won't get the chance," Laura assured her. "We'll make sure Blaze is never out of our sight. The deputies will be hidden nearby, and the moment the criminals show up, we'll catch them in the act." Jack frowned. "You're putting a lot of faith in this working." "It's our best shot," Laura replied. "Without solid evidence, we can't shut them down. Blaze could be the key to proving what they've done." Emily looked at Blaze, her chest tightening. She'd promised him he would never have to suffer again, and now she was agreeing to put him at risk. But as much as it scared her, she knew Laura was right. Stopping these people wasn't just about Blaze. It was about protecting every horse they might hurt in the future. "I'll do it," Emily said quietly. Jack shot her a sharp look. "Emily, I'm not backing out," she interrupted, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "If it means stopping them, I'll do whatever it takes." Jack sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. "You're braver than you should be for your age," he muttered. "Fine, but I'm not letting you or that horse out of my sight." Laura nodded, satisfied. "We'll start setting up tonight." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the ranch was transformed into a carefully orchestrated trap. Deputies dressed in plain clothes positioned themselves around the property, hidden among the trees and bushes. Surveillance equipment was set up to capture every angle of the paddock. The sheriff himself, a gruff man named Dean Reynolds, coordinated the operation from a makeshift command center in a nearby barn. Blaze, unaware of the danger surrounding him, stood in his paddock, his dark coat gleaming in the fading light. Emily sat on the fence, watching him closely. Jack and Laura joined her, their faces tense. "This will work," Laura said, more to herself than anyone else. "It has to." Emily swallowed hard. "What if they don't come?" "They'll come," Jack said grimly. "Men like that can't resist when they think they're in control." Hours passed, and the ranch grew silent. The distant sound of crickets filled the air, mingling with the occasional whinny of one of Jack's other horses. Emily fought to keep her eyes open, her nerves stretched thin. Then, just after midnight, the sound of an engine shattered the quiet. "They're here," a deputy's voice crackled over the radio. Emily's heart raced as the familiar black truck rolled into view, its headlights off to avoid detection. The wiry man and his stocky companion from the previous night stepped out, their movements deliberate and confident. One of them carried a pair of bolt cutters, while the other held a thick rope. Emily's breath hitched. "They're going to try to take him." "Stay calm," Jack said, gripping her shoulder. "We've got this." The men approached Blaze's paddock, their voices low. "There you are, you stubborn bastard," the wiry man muttered, unlocking the gate. Blaze snorted nervously, stepping back. "Don't spook him," the stocky man warned. "Just grab him and let's go." Before they could get any closer, the sheriff's voice boomed through the darkness. "Drop the rope and step away from the horse." Blinding spotlights flooded the paddock as deputies emerged from their hiding places, their guns drawn. The wiry man cursed, raising his hands. "Damn it!" The stocky man tried to run, but two deputies tackled him to the ground. Blaze reared back, letting out a frightened whinny, but Emily was already by his side, soothing him with soft words. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, stroking his neck. "They're not going to hurt you." As the men were handcuffed and led away, Laura approached Emily, her expression triumphant. "We got them," she said. "This is just the start, but it's a big win." Emily nodded, relief washing over her. She looked at Blaze, who was finally beginning to calm down. "It's over," she whispered. "You're safe now." The arrests at the ranch had been a success, but for Laura and the sheriff, the operation was far from over. The two men in custody had given up limited information, but enough to confirm that the illegal racing ring stretched beyond Texas and into neighboring states. Blaze's scars, coupled with auction records and eyewitness accounts, were crucial evidence. Yet, Laura knew that to dismantle the operation completely, they needed to go deeper. 2 weeks after the arrests, Laura called a meeting at Jack's ranch. Emily, Jack, Sam, and the sheriff gathered in the barn, the air heavy with anticipation. "We have confirmation," Laura began, spreading a map across a workbench. "The main hub of their operation is at a private ranch just across the border in New Mexico. It's where they're keeping other horses like Blaze." Emily's heart sank. "They're still hurting them?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Laura said, her face grim. "But we have an opportunity. The men we arrested said a major race is happening in 3 days. If we can get in and document what's happening, we'll have enough evidence to shut them down for good." Jack crossed his arms. "How are we supposed to get in?" They're not exactly going to roll out the welcome mat. Laura pulled out a folder containing photos of the racing events. They don't check everyone who comes through. If we pose as buyers or spectators, we can slip in. Sam frowned. And then what? Take pictures and hope they don't catch us? No, Laura replied. We're coordinating with federal authorities. They'll be standing by to raid the ranch once we've gathered enough evidence. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Emily looked at Blaze, who stood quietly in the paddock outside the barn. The thought of other horses suffering as he had filled her with a fiery resolve. I want to help, she said firmly. Jack immediately shook his head. No way, Emily. This is dangerous. I'm the only one Blaze trusts, Emily argued. If we need him to stay calm during this, he'll need me. Laura nodded thoughtfully. She has a point. If Blaze is going to be part of this, Emily's presence could make a difference. Jack sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. This isn't a decision we should take lightly. We're not, Laura assured him. We'll do everything we can to keep everyone safe. But we need Blaze. His scars are undeniable evidence of what's happening. After a long silence, Jack finally relented. Fine, but I'm going too. The day of the operation arrived quickly. Emily, Jack, and Laura dressed in plain clothes to blend in with the crowd. Blaze was loaded into a trailer and transported to the outskirts of the New Mexico ranch. Federal agents disguised as workers mingled among the spectators, their radios crackling softly with updates. Emily stood beside Blaze as Jack adjusted his hat and scanned the bustling ranch. The air was thick with tension, the faint smell of sweat and dirt mingling with the nervous energy of the horses pinned nearby. Remember, Laura whispered, her voice low. We're just here to observe. Don't draw attention to yourselves. Emily nodded, her hand resting on Blaze's neck. We'll be careful. As they entered the main arena, Emily's stomach churned. Horses with sleek coats but haunted eyes were being paraded in front of potential buyers. Men in suits barked orders at workers, their voices cold and commanding. The sound of a whip cracked through the air, making Blaze flinch. Easy, boy, Emily murmured, stroking his neck. Jack leaned closer to her. This place is worse than I thought. Laura wandered ahead, discreetly taking photos with a hidden camera. When she returned, her face was pale. They're preparing for the race, she said. We need to act fast. They moved toward the stables, where horses were being fitted with crude harnesses. Emily's eyes widened as she saw a young, chestnut mare trembling violently, her ribs visible beneath her thin coat. Her handler yanked her forward roughly, muttering curses. Emily clenched her fists. This has to stop. It will, Laura said, her voice firm. She tapped her earpiece, signaling the federal agents. We're ready. Minutes later, chaos erupted. Agents poured into the ranch, their badges flashing as they shouted commands. Workers scattered, some attempting to flee while others surrendered immediately. Emily stayed close to Blaze, her heart pounding as the scene unfolded. The wiry man from the previous raid appeared, his face twisted with rage. You, he snarled, pointing at Emily. This is your fault. Before Emily could react, Blaze stepped forward, his massive frame blocking her from the man. The horse snorted loudly, pawing the ground as if daring the man to come closer. Jack stepped in front of Emily, his rifle raised. You take one more step, and it'll be your last. The man froze, his bravado faltering as federal agents surrounded him. It's over, Laura said, her voice cold. You're done. Within an hour, the ranch was secured, and dozens of horses were being loaded onto trailers bound for rescue facilities. Emily stood with Blaze, her arms wrapped around his neck. You're a hero, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Blaze nuzzled her gently, his dark eyes calm. For the first time, Emily felt a sense of peace. The fight was over, and Blaze, and so many others, were finally safe. The sun rose gently over the Texas horizon, casting golden light across Jack's ranch. Blaze stood in his paddock, his black coat gleaming as he grazed on fresh hay. The air was filled with a rare sense of peace, the tension of the past weeks finally giving way to calm. Emily sat on the fence, a small notebook in her lap. She'd been documenting Blaze's journey since the day she first saw him at the auction. Now, as she flipped through the pages, she felt a swell of pride. The scars on Blaze's body told a story of pain, but they were no longer the defining feature of his life. His eyes, once filled with fear, now shone with trust and strength. Jack walked over, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. "Mornin', kid," he greeted, leaning against the fence beside her. "How's he doing?" "Better," Emily said, watching as Blaze flicked his tail lazily. "I think he finally feels safe." Jack nodded, his weathered face softening. "You've done good by him, Emily. Not many would have had the guts to do what you did." "It wasn't just me," Emily replied, smiling up at him. "You and Laura helped. And Blaze, he's the real hero." Laura arrived a short while later, stepping out of her truck with a folder under her arm. "Good news," she said as she approached. The raid in New Mexico led to the rescue of over 30 horses. The ringleaders are in custody, and the operation's shut down for good. Emily's heart swelled. "They're safe now?" "They're safe," Laura confirmed, her smile warm. "And it's all thanks to you and Blaze." Jack grunted. "And a whole lot of law enforcement." Laura laughed. "That too." Over the next few weeks, Blaze's transformation became the talk of the town. Word of his story spread, and people began visiting Jack's ranch to see the horse who had survived so much and helped bring justice to others. Donations poured in for the rescued horses, and Laura's organization gained the support it needed to continue its work. One afternoon, Emily stood in the paddock with Blaze, holding a soft bridle in her hands. She'd been working with him for weeks, and now she felt he was ready for the next step. "You trust me, don't you?" she asked, stroking his nose. Blaze huffed softly, nudging her shoulder. Jack watched from the porch, his arms crossed. "You sure about this, Emily?" She nodded. "He's ready." Slowly, she slipped the bridle over Blaze's head, her movements steady and calm. Blaze stood still, his dark eyes watching her intently. When the bridle was secure, Emily took a deep breath and led him toward the mounting block. As she climbed onto his back, she felt a rush of nerves and excitement. Blaze shifted slightly but didn't resist. Emily took the reins gently, her heart pounding. "You've got this, Emily," Jack called out, his voice steady with encouragement. Emily gave Blaze a soft nudge, and he began to walk, his powerful legs moving smoothly beneath her. Tears filled her eyes as she guided him around the paddock, the trust between them palpable. "We did it, Blaze," she whispered. "We really did it." In the months that followed, Blaze became a symbol of resilience and hope. Emily often spoke at local events, sharing his story and raising awareness about animal cruelty. Blaze, now calm and confident, stood by her side at every event, his presence inspiring everyone who met him. One evening, as Emily sat by the paddock, watching Blaze graze under the setting sun, Jack joined her. "You've done something special here, kid," he said, his voice filled with pride. "Not just for Blaze, but for everyone who's heard his story." Emily smiled, resting her chin on her knees. "He's special, Jack. He taught me that even when things seem hopeless, there's always a way to heal." Blaze lifted his head, looking at Emily with eyes that no longer held fear, but trust. She reached out and stroked his nose, her voice soft. "You're home now, boy, and no one's ever going to hurt you again." The ranch grew quiet as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted with shades of orange and pink. For the first time in a long while, everything felt right. Blaze was finally free. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. If you've watched this far, comment "I watched this far" and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video appearing on the end screen. It's incredibly exciting.